The Lemesurier Inheritance. Poirot and I have investigated many mysterious cases together, but I believe none can quite compare to the extraordinary chain of events that occupied our attention for so many years, and which my friend ultimately solved with such brilliance. The story begins on a wartime evening, when our attention was first drawn to the Lemesurier family. Not long before, Poirot and I had renewed our old friendship, which had begun years earlier in Belgium. At the time, he was successfully concluding an investigation for the War Office. We were dining at Charlton's with a government official who was, quite rightly, showering Poirot with compliments. Before long, the official departed for a business appointment, leaving us to linger over our coffee. As we were leaving the room, a familiar voice called out to me. Turning, I recognized Captain Vincent Lemesurier, whom I had met some time ago in France. Beside him stood a gentleman whose resemblance to the captain suggested a close relation. This was confirmed when he was introduced as Hugo Lemesurier, my young friend's uncle. I cannot say I knew the captain well, but he struck me as a pleasant and rather romantic figure. Rumor had it that he belonged to an ancient aristocratic line that had held an estate in Northumberland since before the Reformation. As Poirot and I were in no hurry, we accepted the young man's invitation, sat down at their table, and indulged in some pleasant conversation. The elder Lemesurier appeared to be about 40. A slight stoop suggested the air of a scholar. It turned out he was currently conducting chemical research on behalf of the government. Our talk was interrupted by a tall young man who hurried toward our table, looking visibly shaken. "Thank God I found you," he cried. "What is it, Roger?" "Your father, Vincent, a bad fall, the young colt." The rest was lost to us as he and Vincent hurried away, talking rapidly. A few minutes later, our companions took a hasty leave. Vincent's father had met with an accident while breaking in a young horse. His condition was so grave that the doctors doubted he would last the night. Vincent seemed stunned by the news. He turned deathly pale, which surprised me somewhat, as I knew he had never been on particularly good terms with his father. "A strange business," remarked Roger Lemesurier, who had joined us at the exit and was introduced as Vincent's cousin. "This might interest you, Monsieur Poirot. I've heard much of you from Higginson, the official from the War Office. He says you are a great expert on psychology." "I do study the human mind, yes," my friend replied modestly. "Did you notice my cousin's face? He looked utterly distracted, didn't he? And do you know why? It's the old family curse. Would you like to hear it?" "That would be most kind of you," said Poirot. Roger glanced at his watch. "It's getting late, and we're meeting at King's Cross soon. Well, Monsieur Poirot, the Lemesuriers are a very ancient family. Centuries ago, back in the Middle Ages, a Lemesurier caught his wife in a compromising situation and suspected her of infidelity. She swore she was innocent, but the old Baron Hugo would hear none of it. They had a son, and the Baron, convinced the child was not his own, threatened to disinherit him. I don't recall exactly what followed, but it was something truly horrific. They say he walled them up alive, mother and son. In short, he killed them both, and as she died, she cursed the Lemesurier line forever. According to legend, the curse decreed that no firstborn son of the Lemesurier blood would ever inherit the family lands. Later, it was discovered that the lady had indeed been innocent. They say Hugo spent his remaining days in a monk's cell, wearing a hair shirt to atone for his sin. But, strange as it seems, since that day, no firstborn son has lived to inherit. The estates have passed to younger brothers or nephews, but never to the eldest son. Vincent's father was the second of 5 brothers. His elder brother died in infancy. During the war, 2 of Vincent's younger brothers were killed, though he always believed it was he who was doomed. "A fascinating history," Poirot remarked thoughtfully. "But now the father is dying, and Vincent, as the eldest son, will surely inherit the ancestral lands." "Exactly. It seems the curse has finally failed in the face of modern life." Poirot shook his head slightly, as if disapproving of the other's light-hearted tone. Roger Lemesurier checked his watch again and took his leave. The sequel to the story followed the very next day, when we learned of the tragic death of Captain Vincent Lemesurier. During the night, while traveling on the Scotch Express, he had apparently opened the carriage door and thrown himself onto the tracks. It was believed to be a sudden mental breakdown, brought on by shell shock and the news of his father's accident. The old legend was mentioned once more in connection with the new heir, Monsieur Ronald Lemesurier, Vincent's uncle, whose only son had fallen at the Somme. I suppose our chance meeting with the young captain on the last night of his life sharpened our interest in all things concerning the Lemesuriers. 2 years later, we heard the death of Ronald Lemesurier, who was already considered an invalid by the time he inherited. He was followed by his brother John, a robust man who died after being stung by a wasp. The sinister fate continued to haunt the family. John's son, a student at Eton, accidentally shot himself during the holidays. Now, the estate passed to the youngest of the 5 brothers, Hugo, whom we had met that fateful night at Charlton's. We discussed this extraordinary run of ill luck from time to time, but only as outside observers. Soon, however, everything changed. One morning, the servant announced the arrival of a Mrs. Lemesurier. She was a tall, energetic woman in her 30s, with a decisive and sensible manner. She spoke with a faint American accent. "Monsieur Poirot, I am glad to meet you. My husband, Hugo Lemesurier, had the honor of meeting you several years ago, though you likely don't remember it." "I remember it perfectly, madam. It was at Charlton's." "How wonderful that you haven't forgotten. I am very worried, Monsieur Poirot." "And what exactly is the cause, madam?" "The fate of my eldest son. I have 2 boys. Ronald is 8 and Gerald is 6. "Go on, madam. What specifically has caused you this distress?" "Monsieur Poirot, within the last 6 months, he has been within a hair's breadth of death 3 times. The first time, he nearly drowned while we were summering in Cornwall. The second, he fell from the nursery window. And most recently, he was nearly struck down by ptomaine poisoning." Perhaps sensing a flicker of skepticism on Poirot's face, Mrs. Lemesurier continued after a pointed pause. "I know what you are thinking, that I am merely a foolish woman making mountains out of molehills. Believe me, madam, I think no such thing. It is only natural for a mother to be distressed by such events, but I fear there is little I can do. I am not the good Lord. It is not given to me to command destiny. I would suggest you place bars on the nursery windows. And as for food, well, what can compare to a mother's own vigilance? But why does it always happen to Ronald and never to Gerald? I suspect it is merely chance, madam." "Do you really believe that? And what do you believe, madam? You and your husband?" A shadow flickered across her face. "It is useless to speak of it to Hugo. He simply won't listen. As you may have heard, there is a curse upon our family, a curse that decrees the eldest son shall never inherit from his father. Hugo believes in it. He is a superstitious man with a blind faith in the doom that follows his bloodline. When I share my fears, he says only one thing. It is the curse, and it cannot be escaped. But I am from the States, Monsieur Poirot, and we Americans don't have much stock in curses. We like these stories when they belong to old families. They give them a certain atmosphere, a touch of mystery." She paused, her eyes brightening. "I was a minor comedy actress when I met Hugo. Back then, the family curse seemed like something entertaining, something that only existed in ancient legends to be told by a fireside on a winter's evening. But when it involves your own children, I adore my boys, Monsieur Poirot. I would do anything for them. So, you do not believe in the family curse, madam? Tell me, monsieur, can a curse cut to the stem of an ivy vine?" "What was it you said, madam?" Poirot exclaimed, leaning forward. "I am asking if a family curse, or the ghost of that poor woman walled up alive, can use a knife on ivy? As for the Cornwall incident, of course, any boy might swim out too far, though Ronald has been a strong swimmer since he was 4, and lose his strength. The business with the ivy is something else entirely. The boys often played a game of climbing up and down the vines, until one day, when Gerald happened to be away from home, the ivy gave way and Ronald fell. By some miracle, he wasn't hurt, but I examined the vine immediately. The main stem had been deeply notched, Monsieur Poirot. Cut through. Do you understand? What you are telling me is very serious indeed," Poirot said gravely. "You say the younger son was away at the time?" "Yes." "And the poisoning? Was he away then as well?" No, they were together then." "Curious," Poirot murmured. "Now, tell me, madam, of the others in your household." "There is Miss Saunders, the governess, John Gardner, my husband's secretary." She hesitated, appearing slightly embarrassed. "And who else, madam?" "Major Roger Lemesurier, the man you met on that tragic evening years ago. He is a frequent guest." "Ah, yes, I remember. Cousin Roger?" "A distant cousin. He doesn't belong to our direct branch of the family, though I believe he is now my husband's nearest kinsman. He is a delightful man. We are all very fond of him, and the boys simply worship him." "Was it he who taught them to climb the ivy?" "Perhaps. He often joins in their games." "Madam," Poirot said, "I must apologize for not giving your fears the weight they deserved. The danger is quite real, and I believe I can help you. You must invite us both to stay with you. Would your husband object?" "Oh, no, but he thinks it's all quite useless. It drives me to distraction that he does nothing, that he simply sits by and waits for Ronald to die." "Calm yourself, madam. Let us formulate a plan." The plan was arranged with meticulous care, and the following day found us traveling north. Poirot sat in deep silence before suddenly asking, "Vincent Lemesurier fell from a train much like this one, did he not?" He emphasized the word "fell" ever so slightly. "Do you suspect foul play?" I asked, "Has it not occurred to you, Hastings, that certain accidents in the Lemesurier line might have been, shall we say, managed? Vincent's death, for instance, or that business with the shotgun where the lad killed himself. There's something unsettling about it. Suppose a child falls from a window. The fact itself is possible and draws no suspicion. But why this child, Hastings? Who gains from the death of the eldest son? A younger brother who is only 6? That is absurd. Perhaps they intend to deal with the younger one later," I suggested, though I had only the vaguest idea of who they might be. Poirot shook his head, clearly unsatisfied. "And the ptomaine poisoning," he continued. "Atropine produces very similar symptoms. Yes, our presence is most necessary." Mrs. Lemesurier greeted us warmly and led us to her husband's study. Hugo had changed greatly since our last meeting. His stoop was more pronounced, and his face had taken on a strange, leaden-gray hue. After listening to Poirot's explanation for our visit, he finally spoke. "It is exactly like Sadie to do this," Hugo said with a weary sigh. "Of course. Stay if you wish, Monsieur Poirot. I am grateful you have come, but what must be will be. The way of the transgressor is hard. We Lemesuriers know that none of us can escape the curse." Poirot mentioned the cut ivy, but it made little impression on Hugo. Likely the carelessness of a gardener. Yes, a knife was used, no doubt, but it was guided by a fatal predestination. I fear, Monsieur Poirot, that the end cannot be delayed for long. Poirot watched him narrowly. "Why do you say that?" "Because I am doomed myself. I saw a doctor last year. I have an incurable disease. My end is near. But before I go, Ronald will be taken. Gerald will be the heir. And if something should happen to the second son as well, nothing will happen to him. He is in no danger. But nonetheless, who would be next?" "The next heir is my cousin, Roger." The conversation was interrupted as a tall, slender man with curly, reddish-brown hair entered the room, carrying a sheaf of papers. "Business later, gardener," Hugo said. Then, turning to us, "My secretary, Mr. Gardiner." The secretary bowed, offered few respectful words suited to the moment, and withdrew, despite his pleasant appearance. There was something repellent about him. Later, as we strolled through the magnificent old park, I shared this impression with Poirot. To my great surprise, he agreed. Yes, Hastings, you are right. I did not like him either. Too oily, too smooth. Such men know how to feather their own nests. Ah, but here are the children. Mrs. Lemesurier and her 2 sons were approaching. The younger, dark-haired boy resembled his mother. The elder had curls of golden brown. To our greeting, the young gentleman responded with manly, firm handshakes, and within minutes, Poirot had utterly enchanted them. Shortly after, we were joined by Miss Saunders, a remarkably modest and inconspicuous governess. For several days, we indulged in a state of blissful idleness, though we remained privately on guard. All seemed peaceful. The boys thrived, and nothing hinted at any lurking danger. On the 4th day, Major Roger Lemesurier arrived to stay. He had changed little, still carefree, still cheerful, with that same easygoing attitude toward life. It was clear he was the boys' favorite. They greeted him with delighted shrieks and immediately dragged him off to the garden to play Indians. Quietly, so as not to draw attention, Poirot followed them. The next day, everyone, children included, was invited for tea at the home of Lady Claygate, a neighbor. Mrs. Lemesurier suggested we join them, but when Poirot stated he would prefer to remain at the house, she seemed visibly relieved. As soon as the party had departed, Poirot went to work. He was like a terrier now. There was not a corner of the house he did not inspect. He moved with such discretion that his actions drew no notice, yet his search yielded nothing. Later, we sat on the terrace with Miss Saunders, who had not been invited to the tea. "The boys were so happy to go," she murmured listlessly. "I only hope they behave, that they don't trample the flower beds or go too near the bees." Poirot froze, his teacup halfway to his lips. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. "Bees?" he asked sharply. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot, bees. 3 whole hives. Lady Claygate is very proud of them." "Bees!" Poirot cried again. He sprang up, clutching his head in his hands, and began to pace the terrace feverishly. I could not fathom why the mere mention of bees had cast him into such despair. When the sound of a returning car reached us, we hurried to the front steps. Ronald got stung by a bee. Gerald reported excitedly. "It's nothing serious," Mrs. Lemesurier said. "We rubbed the spot with ammonia, and it hasn't even swollen." "Let me see, mon ami," Poirot requested. "Where's the place?" "Right here on my neck," Ronald said importantly. "It hardly hurts at all." Papa said, "Don't move, a bee has landed on you." I stayed perfectly still, and he took it off, but it managed to sting me anyway. It only felt like a pinprick. I didn't cry. I'm going to school next year, you know. Poirot examined the child's neck with intense focus. Stepping back, he caught my arm and whispered, Tonight, my friend, we shall have work to do, but not a word to anyone." He refused to explain further, and I spent the evening consumed by curiosity. Poirot retired early, and I followed. As we climbed the stairs, he gripped my arm. "Do not undress. In a little while, extinguish your light and join me. I shall be waiting here on the landing." I did exactly as I was told. When I crept out, Poirot was waiting. With a gesture for silence, we stole into the wing where the children slept. Ronald had a small room of his own. We entered on tiptoe and positioned ourselves in the darkest corner. The boy's breathing was deep and rhythmic. "He seems fast asleep," I whispered. Poirot nodded. "Drugged," he breathed. "Why?" "So that he does not cry out when—" Poirot hesitated. "When what?" I asked. "When he is given the injection, my friend." "Sure." Silence now. I expect nothing will happen for at least an hour. But Poirot was wrong. Scarcely 10 minutes had passed when the door opened soundlessly. Someone entered the room. I could hear only their rapid, shallow breathing. The figure moved toward the bed. There was a faint click, and the beam of an electric torch illuminated the sleeping child. We could not see the person, who remained shrouded in shadow. They placed the torch on the floor, touched the boy's neck with their left hand, and with the right brought forward a gleaming syringe. Poirot and I sprang up as one and lunged at the intruder. The flashlight tumbled to the floor and went out, leaving us to grapple in pitch darkness. The man possessed a desperate, unnatural strength, but together we eventually overpowered him. "The light, Hastings. I must see his face, though I believe I already know whose it is." I thought I knew, too. In those first frantic moments, I suspected the secretary, Gardiner, purely out of my own dislike for the man. But as I fumbled for the torch, a realization hit me. Of course, we had caught the monster who stood to gain most from the death of these young boys. The cousin, Roger. My foot brushed the flashlight. I snatched it up and clicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, and we gasped. There, pinned beneath us, was the face of Hugo Lemesurier, the boy's own father. I nearly dropped the light. Incredible, I rasped, my voice failing me. It is impossible. Lemesurier was unconscious. Together, we carried him to his own quarters and laid him upon the bed. Leaning over, Poirot carefully extracted a syringe still gripped in the man's right hand and held it up for me to see. I shuddered. What is in it? Poison. Formic acid, I suspect. Formic acid? Yes. Remember, he is a chemist by profession. He likely prepared it himself. His son's death would have been easily attributed to the beast's sting from earlier today. Merciful heavens. I breathed. His own son. Did you suspect this, Poirot? Poirot nodded grimly. Yes, the man is mad, of course. He became unhinged by the family legend, a monomania. An irresistible urge to become the master of the estate drove him to a series of cold-blooded crimes. Perhaps the seed was planted that night on the train with Vincent. He could not allow the prophecy to fail. Ronald's son was dead, and Ronald himself was a dying man. Poirot sighed, looking at the broken figure on the bed. What I did not suspect until now was that he murdered his brother John in the same fashion, injecting formic acid to mimic a wasp sting, and then staged the accident with the shotgun for John's son. Finally, his ambition was realized. He became the lord of the manor, but his triumph was short-lived. He soon learned he was terminally ill. By then, he was a slave to his delusion that no firstborn Lemesurier must ever inherit. He likely goaded the boy into the water in Cornwall, notched the ivy, and when those failed, turned to poison. What devilish coldness, I said with a shiver, and how meticulously planned. Yes, my friend, there is nothing more remarkable than the extraordinary sanity of the insane, or, if you prefer, the extreme eccentricity of the sane. I suspect he only recently crossed the border into madness. In the beginning, there was a terrible logic to his actions. To think, I mused, I actually suspected Roger, that charming young man. Naturally, we knew he was with Vincent on that fatal night, and he was next in line after Hugo's children. But the facts did not fit. Why was the ivy cut when only Ronald was home? Roger would want both children gone. And today, when they returned from tea, it was the father who had insisted on removing the bee. I remembered the death of the uncle by a wasp sting, and then I understood everything. Epilogue. A few months later, Hugo Lemesurier passed away in a private sanatorium. A year after that, his widow married John Gardner, and young Ronald inherited his father's vast estates. Well, I said to Poirot one afternoon, with the successful breaking of the Lemesurier curse, I suppose one more myth has been laid to rest. I am not so sure, Poirot murmured thoughtfully. I am not at all sure it was only a matter of a curse. Then what else? I will answer you in 2 words, my friend, and you will understand at once. Auburn-haired, auburn hair. I whispered, leaning in, did you find traces of blood? You have too much imagination, Hastings. I am referring to something far more prosaic, the color of young Ronald Lemesurier's hair.